Imagine a pilot, high above the vast blue Pacific, the roar of his engine a symphony of power. He's closing in on an enemy fighter, a nimble Japanese Zero, weaving and twisting through the sky. For decades, hitting a moving target from a moving platform in 3 dimensions was one of the hardest things any human could ever do. It was pure art, pure instinct, pure raw skill. But then something changed. A quiet, almost invisible piece of technology started turning ordinary pilots into sharpshooters, into aerial snipers, and the Japanese pilots, well, they never even saw it coming. They just saw their friends, their comrades, exploding in the sky from distances that seemed impossible. The Second World War, especially in the Pacific, was a brutal, relentless clash of machines and men. From the moment the first bombs fell on Pearl Harbor, the skies over the Pacific became a battleground unlike any other. Early on, the Japanese Zero, with its incredible maneuverability, was a fearsome opponent. It could dance around American planes, turning inside them, getting on their tails, and often, despite its light armor, winning the day. American pilots, flying heavier, more robust aircraft like the Wildcat, had to rely on hit-and-run tactics, sheer speed, and diving attacks. It was a game of cat and mouse, often a deadly one, where the mouse could turn around and bite with surprising ferocity. The challenge was always about hitting a target. Think about it. You're moving at hundreds of miles per hour. Your target is also moving, often at a similar speed, sometimes even faster, and it's not flying in a straight line. It's dodging, weaving, climbing, diving. Now, add to that the fact that your bullets don't fly in a perfectly straight line either. Gravity pulls them down, wind pushes them, and the target is moving *forward*, even as your bullets are traveling through the air to reach where it was *. You had to guess where the target would be by the time your bullets arrived. This was called deflection shooting, and it was the holy grail of aerial combat. For years, pilots used what were called fixed sights. Imagine looking through a small glass screen with a dot or a set of rings etched on it. You'd line up your target, and then you'd have to manually lead it, meaning you'd aim ahead of where it actually was, predicting its movement. This took immense practice, incredible spatial awareness, and a gut feeling that few ever truly mastered. Only the most naturally gifted pilots, the ones with an almost supernatural hand-eye coordination and an innate understanding of physics, became aces. They were the legends, the ones who could consistently put rounds into an enemy fighter. For everyone else, it was a constant struggle, a spray-and-pray effort, where success often came down to luck, or getting so close you couldn't miss. And getting that close in a dogfight was a huge risk. The combat over the Pacific was particularly unforgiving. The distances were vast, the stakes incredibly high. Pilots were often flying for hours over open ocean, and the enemy, while often less armored, was fiercely dedicated and highly skilled. The Japanese pilots, trained in a culture of extreme discipline, were masters of close quarters, dogfighting. Their Zeros, while vulnerable to concentrated fire, were so agile that they could often evade even the best American marksmen. This led to prolonged, drawn-out engagements where both sides expended a lot of ammunition for relatively few kills. Something had to change if American air superiority was to be definitively established, not just through numbers, but through sheer combat effectiveness. Enter a marvel of engineering, a piece of technology so groundbreaking it would fundamentally alter the dynamics of aerial warfare, the gyro gun sight. It wasn't born overnight. The concept had been simmering for a while, with British scientists and engineers like T.S. MacArthur and companies like Ferrante making early strides. But it was, in America, building on principles used in the Norden bomb site, that the technology truly blossomed. Imagine taking the complex calculations a human pilot had to make in their head. The target's speed, your speed, the angle, the bullet drop, and automating it. That's what the gyro gun sight did. At its heart, the gyro gun sight had a small spinning gyroscope. This gyroscope could sense the rate at which your plane was turning, how fast you were moving your nose. It was incredibly sensitive. This information, along with some other inputs from the pilot, like the approximate wingspan of the enemy aircraft, was fed into a tiny analog computer inside the sight. This computer would then continuously calculate the precise lead angle needed. Instead of a fixed dot, the sight projected a dynamic reticle, a set of rings or a dot, that asterisk moved asterisk to show the pilot exactly where to aim. The pilot simply had to put the reticle on the target, and the sight did the rest, showing them where the bullets would actually go. It was like having a supercalculator in your cockpit, constantly working out the physics of hitting a moving target. The first versions, like the K-14 sight developed for the U.S. Army Air Forces and the Mark 18 for the U.S. Navy and Marines, started to appear in significant numbers in 1944. Initially, there was some skepticism. Pilots are often resistant to new technology, especially when their lives depend on their own instincts and skills. Why do I need a machine to tell me where to shoot? Some might have grumbled, but those who tried it quickly realized its potential. This wasn't a crutch, it was an amplifier. It didn't replace skill. It enhanced it, turning good pilots into great ones, and great pilots into legends. And what better aircraft to pair this revolutionary technology with than the Vought F-4U Corsair? The Corsair. What a machine. It was a beast, a monster of a fighter, instantly recognizable by its distinctive inverted gull wings, earning it nicknames like Whistling Death from the Japanese and Bentwing Bird from the Americans. Powered by the colossal 18-cylinder Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, it was one of the most powerful piston-engine fighters ever built. It could scream through the sky at over 400 miles per hour, climb like a rocket, and dive even faster. It carried a devastating punch, 6.50 caliber machine guns, 3 in each wing, capable of unleashing a torrent of lead. But the Corsair wasn't without its quirks. Early models were tricky to land on aircraft carriers due to poor forward visibility over its long nose, and a tendency to bounce on landing. Its high torque could also make takeoffs challenging. For a while, the Navy relegated them to land-based Marine squadrons. But the Marines, particularly legends like Pappy Boyington and his Black Sheep Squadron, quickly fell in love with its raw power and ruggedness. They learned to tame the beast, and in the hands of a skilled pilot, the Corsair was practically unstoppable. Its speed and heavy armament meant it preferred boom and zoom tactics, diving on enemy formations, unleashing a devastating burst, and climbing away before the enemy could react. This style of fighting was perfect for the new Jarragon sight. The sight allowed pilots to make those quick high-speed passes count, turning potential hits into definite kills. When the Jarragon sights were installed in Corsairs, especially in the later models, and retrofitted into earlier ones, it was a match made in heaven. The combination was lethal. Imagine a pilot climbing into his Corsair, the familiar smell of hydraulic fluid and aviation fuel filling the cockpit. He'd fire up the engine, the roar shaking the very bones of the aircraft. Once airborne, he'd be looking for trouble, scanning the vast expanse of blue. When an enemy plane was spotted, the pursuit would begin. Instead of having to meticulously guess the lead, the pilot would simply input the estimated wingspan of the enemy aircraft into the gyrosight. This was crucial because different planes required different lead calculations. The sight would then project its dynamic reticle onto the reflector glass. As the Corsair closed in, the pilot would maneuver to get a bead on the target. This is where the magic happened. He'd put the reticle over the enemy plane, and as the enemy turned, the reticle would stick asterisk to the target. It was almost as if the sight had a mind of its own, constantly adjusting, constantly calculating, showing the pilot exactly where his bullets would intersect with the enemy's path. It took the guesswork out of deflection shooting. A pilot could now hit a target from much greater distances than ever before, often from 600, 800, even 1,000 yards away. This was a monumental shift. Before, anything beyond 300 yards was considered a long shot, a hopeful prayer. Now, pilots were consistently scoring hits at ranges that would have been unthinkable just a few years prior. This extended range had several profound effects. Firstly, it meant pilots could engage and destroy enemy aircraft without having to get into a close-quarters knife fight. They could make a single pass, fire a devastating burst, and often achieve a one-pass, one-kill outcome. This dramatically increased the efficiency of combat. Less time spent in a dogfight meant less exposure to enemy fire, which in turn meant higher pilot and aircraft survivability. It also meant conserving precious fuel and ammunition. Secondly, it democratized aerial marksmanship. While the truly gifted aces still stood out, the gyrogun sight leveled the playing field for many. A pilot who might have been an average shot with a fixed sight could now become a highly effective marksman. The learning curve was still there. You still needed to be a good pilot, understand combat tactics, and have the courage to fly into harm's way. But the sight allowed those pilots to translate their flying skills into effective gunnery with unprecedented accuracy. Stories from pilots who experienced the transition were often filled with awe. One pilot recalled feeling like he had suddenly gained a superpower, that he could reach out and touch the enemy from afar. Another described it as feeling like the target was suddenly much, much bigger, easier to hit. The impact on Japanese pilots was devastating. They were accustomed to American pilots having to get close to engage in the kind of swirling, turning dogfights where their agile Zeros excelled. Suddenly, they were being hit from distances they couldn't comprehend. Tracer rounds, those glowing streaks of fire, would seem to come from nowhere. Tearing through their aircraft before they even registered an American plane was truly in firing range. Their fixed sights offered no such advantage. They still relied on their innate skill, their close-in maneuvering. But against an enemy that could snipe them from afar, their tactics became increasingly suicidal. Imagine a Japanese pilot, Lieutenant Akira Tanaka, flying his Zero. He spotted a formation of Corsairs. He banks hard, trying to get into position, maybe hoping to get on one's tail. But before he can even complete his turn, a stream of .50 caliber rounds rips through his wing. He feels the shudder, sees the holes appear, maybe a flash of fire. He's hit, badly. He looks around, frantically, trying to pinpoint the attacker. Where did that come from? The American plane is still a distant speck, seemingly too far away to have scored such a hit. This wasn't just demoralizing. It was terrifying. It bred a sense of helplessness, a feeling that the enemy had some invisible advantage, some magic weapon that defied the rules of engagement they had always known. The psychological warfare was just as important as the physical destruction. When pilots start getting picked off from what seems like an impossible distance, it creates a deep sense of unease and fear. Japanese pilots, already facing overwhelming numbers and a dwindling supply of experienced airmen, now had to contend with an enemy that seemed to possess the ability to shoot with uncanny precision. This contributed to a general decline in morale and an increasing reluctance to engage American fighters head-on. The skies, once contested, slowly but surely became dominated by the planes equipped with these advanced sights. The effectiveness of the gyrogun sight-equipped Corsairs became particularly evident in the later stages of the Pacific War. During intense campaigns like Iwo Jima and Okinawa, these were brutal battles where air superiority was paramount. Corsairs provided critical close air support for ground troops, strafing enemy positions, bombing fortifications, and engaging any Japanese aircraft that dared to challenge them. But they also had a crucial role in intercepting the increasingly desperate kamikaze attacks. Kamikaze pilots, fueled by fanatical devotion, would often dive straight towards American ships, aiming to inflict maximum damage. These were fast-moving, determined targets, often flying erratic paths to avoid anti-aircraft fire. Hitting them required incredible precision, often from difficult angles, in a short window of time. The gyrogun sight became an indispensable tool for Corsair pilots tasked with intercepting these suicide attackers. A pilot could quickly acquire the target, let the sight calculate the lead, and unleash a torrent of fire, hoping to disable the kamikaze before it reached its target. Many a ship was saved by a Corsair pilot, whose pinpoint accuracy, thanks in part to his gyrogun sight, managed to explode a kamikaze in midair, or send it splashing harmlessly into the ocean. One of the less-known impacts of the gyrogun sight was how it affected tactics. Before, pilots would often try to get directly behind an enemy plane, known as 6 o'clock, because it was the easiest shot with a fixed sight. But with the gyro sight, pilots could make effective shots from oblique angles, from a quartering position, even from head-on passes. This opened up new tactical possibilities, allowing pilots to be more aggressive, more unpredictable, and ultimately, more lethal. It meant that a Japanese pilot, no matter how skilled, could no longer rely on specific maneuvers to avoid fire, because the threat could come from almost any angle. The stories from the squadrons that received these sights are fascinating. Pilots would spend hours in ground training, practicing with the new equipment, learning to trust the moving reticle. Some would even rig up makeshift target ranges, projecting the sight's reticle onto a screen and trying to track moving objects. When they finally took it into combat, the results were often dramatic. Kill ratios improved, and individual pilot scores started to climb. It wasn't just the aces racking up kills anymore. Even newer, less experienced pilots were finding themselves scoring hits they never thought possible. Consider the sheer technological gap this created. The Japanese, while brilliant aircraft designers and fierce warriors, simply didn't have anything comparable. Their industrial base was already struggling under the weight of the war, and their scientific research was often focused elsewhere. They continued to rely on simpler fixed sights, which, while effective in the hands of a master, were no match for the sophisticated calculating power of the gyrogun sight. It was a classic example of how a relatively small, focused technological advantage could have an outsized impact on the battlefield. The Corsair, already a formidable aircraft, became even more deadly with this addition. Its speed allowed it to dictate the terms of engagement. Its heavy armament delivered a devastating blow, and the gyro gun sight ensured that blow landed exactly where it was intended. It transformed the Corsair from a powerful slugger into a precise sniper, capable of picking off targets with surgical accuracy from a distance. The roaring engine, the thundering guns, and the precise aiming mechanism combined to create an aerial predator that the Japanese simply couldn't contend with. The climax of this story isn't a single battle, but rather the cumulative effect across the entire Pacific theater in the war's final year. As more and more Corsairs, and other American fighters like the P-51 Mustang and P-47 Thunderbolt, were equipped with these advanced sights, the Japanese air forces found themselves in an increasingly untenable position. Their experienced pilots were dwindling, their aircraft were often inferior, and now the American pilots were shooting them down with almost casual ease from ranges that defied belief. The skies over Japan itself became a shooting gallery for American fighters, picking off the last remnants of the Japanese air arm. The ability to engage from a distance meant less risk for the attacking planes, allowing them to press their advantage with greater impunity. This technological edge, born from clever engineering and applied with brutal efficiency, contributed significantly to the overwhelming air superiority the Allies achieved, paving the way for the ultimate conclusion of the war. The Japanese never truly understood the full scope of this silent, deadly advantage until it was too late. They saw the results, felt the impact, but the underlying reason for the sudden and dramatic increase in American pilots' accuracy remained largely a mystery to them, shrouded in the fog of war and technological disparity. So, what does this all mean in the grand scheme of things? The gyro gun sight, combined with powerful aircraft like the Corsair, didn't just win battles. It fundamentally reshaped aerial combat. It proved that technological innovation, even in seemingly small components, could have a monumental impact on the outcome of a war. It democratized skill, making more pilots more effective. It saved countless American lives by allowing pilots to fight more efficiently and safely. It also accelerated the evolution of air-to-air combat, setting the stage for radar-guided missiles and even more sophisticated targeting systems that would come in the decades that followed. This story isn't just about a piece of equipment. It's about how human ingenuity, pushed by the desperate necessities of war, can create something truly revolutionary. It's about how a small gyroscope and a bit of analog computing turned the already formidable Corsair into an aerial sniper, making Japanese pilots feel like they were fighting ghosts, getting picked off by an unseen hand. They never expected it, never quite understood it, and in the end, they simply couldn't counter it. It was a silent, devastating advantage that helped turn the tide in the skies of the Pacific. If you found this deep dive into World War II aviation fascinating, hit that subscribe button for more untold stories.